You may have heard that the typical meal of a medieval peasant consisted of a simple thin gruel, made from flour and water. But what really filled their empty stomachs? What did medieval peasants eat? To stay alive, stick around until the end because we guarantee you won't expect the answer. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a journey back to medieval times to uncover the truth about what peasants ate. Did they just munch on some boring bread and water? Nope. There's much more to the story. We'll dive into the surprising and sometimes even gross details of their diet. So get ready. You might just learn something you didn't know before. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more epic historical stories. For a majority of human history, the lives of peasants were characterized by hardship, drudgery, and struggle for survival. And their diet played a significant role in this. Now let's time travel back to medieval Europe and see how these resilient people fueled their bodies. Peasants ate a lot of carbohydrates, specifically grains. Grains made up an estimated 80% of their daily caloric intake. The most common type of grain consumed was wheat. But when it comes to flour, peasants couldn't afford to buy the finest wheat flour. Instead, they relied on coarser and cheaper grains like barley, oats, and rye. These grains were milled into a dense, dark bread, which was the central part of every meal. A major component of the peasant diet was pottage. This was basically a thick, hearty stew made by boiling whatever was available. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a soup or stew. Pottage was made by boiling grains, vegetables, and foraged plants in a single pot over a fire that was kept going for days. This ensured that the food cooked slowly and absorbed the flavors of the other ingredients. Peasants took great pride in their pottage, and each family had its own unique recipe passed down through generations. Vegetables also played a vital role in the peasant diet. Crops like cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, and beans were not only filling, but also provided essential nutrients. Peasants usually grew these vegetables in small family plots near their homes. These plots were a mix of useful and edible plants. They grew vegetables, herbs, and even medicinal plants. Another critical aspect of their food supply was foraging. Men, women, and children would spend hours searching for wild greens, berries, nuts, and mushrooms in the surrounding forests and fields. These foraged items weren't just a supplement to their meals. They were often the difference between a meager meal and an empty stomach. Depending on the season and location, the availability of wild food varied. However, some staples like dandelions, wild garlic, and stinging nettles were almost always available. Meat was a rare luxury for peasants. They rarely had access to beef or venison, which were reserved for the nobility. Instead, their main sources of protein were small animals that they could raise or catch, like chickens, pigs, or rabbits. Sometimes they would also eat the eggs and milk of these animals. Having a cow was a sign of wealth, so they rarely drank their milk. If they did, it was probably goat or sheep milk, which were more common among peasants. While they rarely got to eat meat, the one animal they could rely on for consistent protein was the pig. Pigs were hardy creatures that could be fed on scraps and foraged food, making them ideal for peasant farmers. Young pigs were weaned off their mother's milk onto a diet of whatever the family could spare, including table scraps, fruits, vegetables, grains, and foraged goods. This diet made the pork they produced tougher and had a gamier flavor than the pork we're used to today. However, this wasn't seen as a negative at the time. After butchering the pig, the meat was often salted or smoked to preserve it for the long winter months. For those living near a river or the coast, fish was an important part of their diet. Fresh fish was often grilled or broiled, while other fish was salted and dried for preservation. Fish was a good source of protein and healthy fats, and it was a welcome addition to their meals. Eggs were another valuable source of protein for peasants. Raising chickens or ducks was a common practice, and these birds provided not only eggs, but also meat when the need arose. The process of raising chickens was straightforward. A rooster and several hens were typically kept, and the male's presence ensured that the females laid fertile eggs. Now, you're probably wondering, what did medieval peasants drink? Surprisingly, water wasn't their go-to beverage. While it might seem obvious, given our modern understanding of nutrition, in the Middle Ages, water was often contaminated and posed health risks. That's why the drink of choice for people of all ages was ale or beer. Ale was made from grain, water, and yeast, and it was a staple drink in medieval society. Even children were given small amounts of diluted ale, which was considered safer than water. Interestingly, the ale they drank contained a low amount of alcohol, around half as much as modern beer. This made it a source of daily calories without the intoxicating effects of high alcohol content. The peasant diet was primarily dictated by what was cheap, available, and filling. The concept of a balanced meal didn't exist. However, surprisingly, this diet was quite nutrient-rich. Many foraged foods provided essential vitamins and minerals that might not have been present in their everyday meals. Despite the hardships of their lives, medieval peasants found ways to nourish themselves. While the diet might seem bland to us now, for a starving person, a hot meal, however simple, was a feast. But hold on, there's more to the story. Medieval peasants didn't just sit down for 3 meals a day. No, their eating habits were a bit different. For starters, they didn't really have a set meal schedule. Instead, they ate whenever food was available. This meant that breakfast, lunch, and dinner might not be regular occurrences. Their primary focus was on consuming whatever they had on hand rather than sticking to a routine. One thing you won't find on their menu was the typical serving of vegetables and fruits that we associate with a balanced meal today. Peasants mostly relied on grains like bread, porridge, and soup. However, this doesn't mean they didn't eat fruits and vegetables. They did consume them, but only when they were in season. When fresh produce wasn't available, they turned to preservation methods like salting, drying, or pickling to enjoy fruits and vegetables year-round. During the winter months, they heavily relied on these preserved foods since fresh produce was scarce. Speaking of scarcity, let's talk about meat. Medieval peasants weren't big meat eaters. In fact, they rarely ate beef or venison because these were considered luxury foods. Instead, they mostly ate pork from pigs they raised or caught small animals like rabbits and squirrels. Occasionally, they also ate eggs and dairy products from animals like cows, goats, and chickens. Life as a medieval peasant was no walk in the park. They faced hunger and the threat of famine, not to mention the hard work that came with their lifestyle. All of these factors influenced their diet. A bad harvest could push them towards starvation, so they always had to be on the lookout for food. To combat hunger, peasants used preservation techniques to keep their food fresh for as long as possible. Salting, drying, smoking, and fermenting were common methods they used. But remember, they didn't have a refrigerator or modern packaging, so keeping food fresh was a real challenge. The preservation of food wasn't just a way to keep it fresh, it was a matter of life and death. During times when fresh food was scarce, they relied on these preservation techniques to stay nourished. Imagine their surprise when they opened a jar of pickles and found a friendly face staring back at them. Just kidding. There's no record of people putting their enemies in jars during the Middle Ages. But hey, it's not the strangest thing we've heard. Back to the topic at hand. Preserving food wasn't just about keeping it fresh. It was about ensuring that it lasted through the winter months when food was scarce. Without proper storage or preservation techniques, their food would quickly spoil, leaving them with nothing to eat. You might think that medieval peasants were pretty organized with their food storage, but in reality, it was a bit chaotic. They didn't have fancy pantry setups like we do today. In fact, their method of storing food was pretty simple. Typically, a single pot of pottage was kept simmering over the fire for days. New ingredients were added as they became available, and whatever was left over was saved for later. This might sound gross to us now, but it was their way of making sure that no food went to waste. Think about it. They didn't have a fridge or modern kitchen appliances, so keeping food fresh was a challenge. This method of cooking also ensured that they had a hot meal whenever they needed it. It might seem odd to us today, but for medieval peasants, this was a practical and efficient way of storing and preparing their food. We often picture medieval peasants as eating bland, tasteless meals consisting of basic ingredients. However, that's not entirely accurate. Sure, their diet lacked the variety we enjoy today, but that doesn't mean their meals were boring. Medieval peasants experimented with different herbs and spices to add flavor to their dishes. They used ingredients like thyme, rosemary, and oregano to give their soups and stews a rich taste. While their meals might not have been as fancy as those in the royal court, they still knew how to make their food flavorful. So next time you think of medieval peasant food, don't just picture bland, watery gruel. These folks knew a thing or two about adding some flavor to their meals. In conclusion, the diet of medieval peasants was shaped by their environment, resources, and social standing. While it might have lacked the variety and richness of the diets of the upper classes, it was a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. Through foraging, preserving, and simple cooking methods, they managed to survive and thrive in a harsh and unforgiving world. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for more epic historical tales. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past.